Some manufacturers, what they'll do is they'll block a component to get prior release or information before they release the components. So because you have got a 296 GTB and it's not a Ferrari Challenge car, obviously the chassis number that we supply them is for a 296 GTB.
One wrecked Ferrari 296 GTB.
No one's ever repaired a 296 which has been this badly damaged. So they were sort of stepping into the unknown. This is the first time the guys are going to see what I bought.
A garage rebuild worth hundreds of thousands. And a supercar that refuses to start no matter what gets replaced. What begins as a straightforward salvage project for Mat Armstrong quickly turns into a battle against Ferrari's locked hybrid systems and software-controlled architecture. Behind the bodywork lies a Challenge-spec transformation, a failed 23,000 pounds battery replacement, and a chain of invisible electronic barriers no workshop can easily bypass. The more the build progresses, the more the car resists, exposing a deeper conflict between independent builders and manufacturers guarding their technology and control over repair access. So what really happened? And what does the evidence reveal? Let's explore the story. The Armstrong Formula. Mat Armstrong built his following the hard way, one written-off car at a time. His YouTube channel is not built around reviews of new models or manufacturer press drives. It is built around the cars that insurers have abandoned.
That's got to be repaired, and alongside that is going to modify it, make it look better, improve it.
Crash-damaged Lamborghinis, waterlogged Porsches, stripped-out supercars that arrive in pieces, and if Armstrong has anything to say about it, leave under their own power. More than 6 million subscribers have tracked that formula across years of content, and the number grows with each new project because the stakes are real. The cars cost real money. The failures are documented in full. The victories, when they come, feel earned in a way that staged content cannot replicate. The project that preceded the Ferrari, a wrecked Bugatti Chiron, had cemented Armstrong's reputation.
Custom wheels made for the Chiron, so we've got to measure the calipers, the distance between the handbrake caliper and the wheel.
As someone willing to engage with the truly extreme end of this genre. A Chiron is not a car that forgives improvisation. Its engineering is extraordinarily dense. Its tolerances are narrow, and sourcing parts for a salvage example is a process that would stop most builders before the first panel comes off. Armstrong navigated it, documented every stage, and drew an audience that had previously had no interest in coachwork radius curves or active aero calibration. When the Ferrari 296 GTB appeared as his next project, the reaction from that audience was immediate, and the difficulty would be of an entirely different order to anything the channel had previously faced. The 296 GTB is not a simple car in any direction. Mid-engine layout. A twin-turbocharged V6.
This Ferrari 296 has a 3-litre twin-turbo V6 mated to an electric motor,
producing in excess of 660 horsepower in combustion form alone. A hybrid electric motor integrated into the drivetrain, and a combined output exceeding 800 horsepower, all packaged in a chassis that weighs less than 1,500 kilograms. Ferrari designed it to sit precisely at the boundary between road car and racetrack, visceral enough to be genuinely involving on public roads, precise enough to be competitive in amateur circuit events, and deeply interconnected in a way that makes it extraordinary to experience and as Armstrong was about to discover extraordinarily difficult to restore when the manufacturer opts not to cooperate. The combustion engine does not function independently of the electric motor. The battery does not operate independently of the control module. Pull on one thread, and the rest of the architecture follows. The car had been recovered from a crash in Cyprus. The damage was front-biased.
Well, something like this. A completely destroyed Ferrari 296.
Severe enough at first inspection to write the car off on paper. Manageable on closer examination for someone with the resources and workshop capability to address it properly. Armstrong bought it, arranged transportation to his workshop, and began the disassembly. The structure was sound. The powertrain components were physically present and appeared intact beneath the surface damage. There was, in those early days, genuine cause for optimism. The kind that comes from a car that looks worse than it actually is. What nobody on the team could see yet was the layer of software-governed control logic sitting beneath the mechanical surface, quietly waiting to become the most significant obstacle the project would face. And beyond that invisible layer, a manufacturer with decades of experience protecting exactly that territory from outside interference. Why did this project feel categorically different from the channel's previous work? Because Ferrari is not Lamborghini. It is not a legacy marque whose parts flow through a relatively open dealer network. Ferrari has spent decades constructing a closed ecosystem around its vehicles. Certified technicians, proprietary diagnostic systems, parts traceability requirements, and a network architecture that exists, at least in part, to ensure that a car wearing the prancing horse reflects the standard Ferrari, intends regardless of what has happened to it between the factory and the present moment. That philosophy extends to salvage cases, to builds outside the official network. And, as Armstrong was about to discover, to YouTubers with 6 million subscribers who have the funding and the platform to document every detail of the process in real time. Was Ferrari aware of the cameras from the outset? Almost certainly. Would the audience change the outcome? That question was going to take months to answer. A Ferrari that won't cooperate. The starting point of any salvage build is predictable enough. Assess the damage, compile the list, start working through it in order. Armstrong's team approached the 296 GTB with that same methodical logic. Bodywork was catalogued. Mechanical components were inspected. The rebuild sequence began to take shape.
And as we need to get this car rolling, we've gone ahead and bought all the components for the front right suspension that need replacing.
There was real momentum in the early stages, the reassuring kind that comes from seeing a car that looks far worse than it structurally is. Then, they tried to start it. Nothing. The 296 GTB declined to start, and the diagnostic process that followed pointed the fault toward the hybrid battery control module, the component that, in Ferrari's integrated powertrain architecture, functions as the gateway through which all powertrain logic passes. This is not simply one module among many. It manages the communication between the high-voltage battery pack, the electric motor, and the combustion engine's control systems. Ferrari's hybrid architecture does not separate these elements in the way that earlier generation hybrid systems might have permitted. If the battery control module is not reading correctly or has detected a fault condition, It will not clear. The car does not proceed past the startup check. There is no manual override. There is no bypass. The module cooperates, or it doesn't. And in Armstrong's workshop, it didn't. What made the situation considerably more complicated was a sourcing decision the team had made in the project's early planning phase. To elevate the build beyond a standard road car restoration, to produce the kind of result that justifies the channel's ambition and its audience's investment, Armstrong's team had sourced genuine components from the 296 Challenge, Ferrari's dedicated track-only racing variant. The Challenge is not sold as a public road car. It is offered exclusively to customers participating in Ferrari's own racing program, and its components reflect that purpose. A rear wing, engineered for significantly greater downforce than the road specification, a redesigned front bumper with a more aggressive aerodynamic profile, and a rear diffuser with dimensions that exceed anything offered on the standard car. These are genuine Ferrari-manufactured parts, with all the documentation and provenance that implies. The problem was not their authenticity. The problem was the context in which they were being fitted. Ferrari's certified repair ecosystem exists for reasons that go beyond simple brand protectionism. When a car bearing the prancing horse leaves a certified facility, there is a traceable history, documented work orders, verified parts provenance, certified technician sign-off. That trail is what allows a restored Ferrari to re-enter the market with a verifiable record attached to it. When a build sources Challenge components privately and performs the modification work outside the certified network, none of that documentation exists. Ferrari cannot validate the outcome. It cannot certify the work. And crucially, it cannot stand behind a car that a future buyer might present as a properly restored example when the restoration history exists only in a YouTube upload archive. Once Ferrari's awareness of the build's scope crystallized, Challenge components work outside the official network. A car that couldn't start the response was direct. Parts orders were reportedly blocked.
The wings, they're on their way, but there are other parts that Ferrari have blocked.
Official support was withdrawn. Armstrong's team were left holding a crashed Ferrari with a hybrid system that wouldn't cooperate, and a manufacturer that had decided, at least for the time being, that this was not a project it would assist with. Meanwhile, the Challenge bodywork continued going on. The custom fabrication for the radiator repositioning and the exhaust rerouting was progressing week by week. The car was transforming visually into something extraordinary. It still had never run. How do you finish a build when the one thing it fundamentally needs, the manufacturer's own diagnostic cooperation, has been taken off the table? Inside the manufacturer's wall. There is a widely held assumption in the supercar world that given sufficient financial resource, most problems yield eventually. Need a component? Find a supplier. Need technical documentation? Track down the right specialist. Need diagnostic access? Locate the equipment through channels outside the main dealer network. For the overwhelming majority of vehicles, even expensive and exotic ones, that logic holds. For a Ferrari 296 GTB, with a proprietary hybrid control architecture and a manufacturer that has chosen not to cooperate, it does not hold at all. The hybrid battery control module at the center of Armstrong's problem is not a component that has an aftermarket alternative. It is purpose-engineered for a single car line, built to communicate with Ferrari's own diagnostic software platform, and calibrated against the specific architecture Ferrari has developed for the 296 GTB's powertrain integration. There is no third-party equivalent. There is no cross-compatible substitute sourced from a related platform. And the diagnostic tools capable of correctly addressing a fault condition within that module SDII, Ferrari's proprietary diagnostic platform used within its authorized network, are not commercially available for independent purchase. They exist within Ferrari's dealer and service infrastructure, and without the company's active cooperation, accessing them for a build outside the certified network is not practically achievable. Armstrong's team could physically handle every other component on the car. The moment the work touched the hybrid control system, they encountered an invisible boundary with no entry point. This dynamic, a manufacturer retaining effective operational control over a vehicle long after it leaves the factory gate, has become one of the more contested questions in modern automotive ownership. Right to repair advocates have argued consistently that the purchaser of a vehicle should have unrestricted access to the tools, parts, and technical documentation required to maintain, repair, and restore it. Manufacturers at the premium and performance end of the market have resisted that argument, contending that proprietary system access protects both the product's integrity and the safety of subsequent owners. Ferrari's position within that debate is among the clearest in the industry. The company has built its service and support architecture around the premise that a Ferrari serviced outside the authorized network is a Ferrari the company cannot stand behind. The Armstrong situation placed that philosophy in unusually prominent public view, and Ferrari, evidently, did not consider the prominence a sufficient reason to alter its position. What does it look like, in practical terms, when a manufacturer withdraws support from a build of this kind? For Armstrong's team, it meant that every avenue that touched the core control system ran into a dead end at the critical juncture. They could remove components, they could source some parts through alternative routes. They could fabricate custom solutions for physical fitment challenges. But every time the work required communicating with the car's hybrid management architecture, every time the solution required Ferrari's tools, Ferrari's software access, or Ferrari's diagnostic sign-off, the absence of the manufacturer's cooperation became the defining constraint. The car was, in effect, locked from the inside, and the only entity holding the key had chosen not to turn it. Adding a further dimension to the standoff was the fact that it was taking place in front of an audience of millions. Armstrong's channel documents the reality of high-end builds, including the reality when that documentation involves a major manufacturer and a very public impasse. The camera's presence did not alter Ferrari's calculation, but it meant that every month of stalled progress, every failed fix, every blocked request was being watched in real time by an audience already invested in the outcome. The pressure that creates is not the kind that makes problem-solving easier. And the problems, as it turned out, were only just beginning. A problem money couldn't solve. When a problem resists the expected solution, the process that follows is one of systematic elimination. You work through every credible alternative in sequence, testing each one before moving to the next, until something changes, or until you run out of alternatives. Armstrong's team entered that process with focus. They exited it, months later, with considerably less money and no closer to a resolution. The first significant avenue was the airbag system. On a crash-damaged vehicle, where the airbags have deployed,
that means that every time you crash your hybrid and your airbags go off, you need a new battery.
the airbag control module typically enters a locked fault state as a deliberate safety measure. A restraint system that has deployed in a real impact cannot simply be electronically cleared and returned to service without verified inspection. In some vehicle architectures, that locked airbag module can propagate a fault condition that prevents the broader vehicle management system from completing its startup sequence. The logic is sound. If the passive safety system cannot confirm its own operational status, the car should not proceed. Armstrong's team replaced the airbags, addressed the control module, and dispatched it to a specialist firm with experience in airbag system restoration and recoding. The work was performed properly. The airbag fault was resolved. The 296 GTB still would not start. The next focus was the pyrofuse. In a high-voltage hybrid vehicle, the pyrofuse is a one-use explosive disconnect integrated into the battery system, designed to sever the high-voltage circuit instantly in the event of a serious impact, precisely the kind the 296 GTB had experienced. Once a pyrofuse has triggered, it is irreversibly spent. It cannot be reset. It must be physically replaced before the high-voltage system can be restored to operational status. On the 296 GTB, this component is not available through the general automotive parts market. It is a Ferrari-specific part, managed tightly within the authorized supply chain, and sourcing it through independent channels requires either a dealer prepared to supply one outside the standard workflow or an uncommon find in the used parts trade. Armstrong's team worked through those channels over an extended period. The search was legitimate, the effort was genuine, and in retrospect, it could not have resolved the underlying problem, because the pyrofuse was not where the root fault resided. But that clarity only comes after the fact. In the middle of a stalled build, you pursue every credible lead regardless. Then came the decision that defined the financial scale of this project's dead-end phase. If the hybrid battery control module was the true source of the starting fault, if the existing unit was damaged, corrupted, or simply incapable of communicating correctly, then a factory-fresh replacement, fully calibrated and carrying no fault history, should clear the problem. The reasoning was methodical. The cost was reported to be approximately $23,800. Armstrong's team placed the order. The new battery assembly arrived. It was installed with care. The startup sequence was initiated. The car still did not start. $23,800 had made no measurable difference whatsoever. The new battery communicated with the car's management systems in exactly the same way as the original, which is to say, it did not communicate at all. The problem was not in the battery. It had never been in the battery. The fault resided upstream, in the system-level communication logic, governing whether the car would accept any battery's input in the first place. A layer of proprietary software architecture that Ferrari controls and that Ferrari had declined to make available. Armstrong had spent a sum sufficient to purchase a perfectly serviceable used car in order to confirm definitively what he had perhaps already suspected. The solution could not be bought independently. It could only come from Ferrari. Through all of this, the Challenge body conversion had continued. The front bumper was on. The rear wing was mounted and torqued. The diffuser was fitted. Weeks of custom fabrication worked to reroute the radiators and exhaust through a body configuration that Ferrari had never engineered. For a road car had been completed by the team. From the outside, the car was genuinely extraordinary. A 296 GTB in full Challenge specification, looking as though it had rolled directly out of a racing program. From the inside, it had never fired a single cylinder. That contrast between the car's appearance and its mechanical reality was stark enough to carry its own meaning about exactly how far persistence, money, and skill can take a project, and exactly where they reach their limit. Ferrari's final condition. There is a version of this story that ends with the car permanently on the lift, aerodynamically transformed, mechanically silent, an expensive monument to what happens when a builder runs out of independent options, and a manufacturer holds its position without exception. Armstrong was not prepared to accept that version. The natural conclusion that the project had reached a point beyond which independent effort could not carry it was available to him, and he did not take it. He reached out to Ferrari again. The specifics of what was communicated in those exchanges have not been made fully public, but the outcome has been documented. Ferrari agreed to re-engage with the project, not unconditionally.
The car's been repaired before, at least part of it. Looks like a bit of filler in the wing. We've got Ferrari's amazing welding.
The manufacturer's renewed willingness to help came attached to a clear and specific requirement: the car had to be fully complete before it would be accepted into Ferrari's official service network. No outstanding fabrication work, no partially fitted panels, no systems left unaddressed, every modification finalized, every component in its intended place, the build at a state that could be described as done. Only then would Ferrari's authorized technicians engage with the hybrid fault and work through whatever fault condition was preventing the startup sequence from completing. That condition is worth pausing to understand because it is not arbitrary. It reflects the same underlying logic that prompted Ferrari's original withdrawal. A partially completed, non-certified build entering the official service network mid-process creates a documentation problem that the system is not equipped to manage cleanly. There is no fixed baseline to inspect. There is no defined state to record. A completed car, even one constructed substantially outside the certified network, represents a different kind of object: accessible, documentable, capable of being entered into Ferrari's service records with at least some degree of clarity about what the technicians are looking at. The condition was restrictive. It was also internally coherent.
There must be a reason for it, but only Ferrari know. Now, we've got the master task to get it out so we can get it repaired.
Ferrari was not moving its policy. It was, however, offering Armstrong a path through it on terms that required the build to be unambiguously finished before the relationship could resume. For Armstrong and his team, the news transformed the character of the remaining work. Every outstanding task, every fabrication detail, every aerodynamic finishing element, every interior component that still needed attention now had a direct and visible connection to the only resolution available. The car had been stalled for months. The path forward was finally visible, and it ran directly through completion. That kind of clarity has its own momentum. The final push of a long build, when the end is defined rather than open-ended, produces a different quality of effort. The team had been working toward a functioning car for a long time. Now, they were working toward a specific point at which Ferrari would step back in and do what no one else could. What does this project ultimately tell us? There is the automotive narrative. A complex hybrid supercar, rebuilt outside the official network, blocked by a proprietary control architecture that required the manufacturer's cooperation to resolve, and eventually brought back to the table through persistence rather than resources alone. There is the ownership question. In an era when high-performance vehicles contain software layers that their manufacturers retain effective control over, what does it mean to own a car? And there is the human element. A builder who spent months working through expensive dead ends, who sent one final email when the logical conclusion was to stop, and who received, in response, the answer that made the rest of the project possible. At the time of this production, the 296 GTB
Ferrari's checks. So the next thing to go on is the quarter panel, but that's not before I put on this aircon line. Has a pretty important job on this 296.
in full challenge specification had still not run under its own power. Ferrari's technicians had not yet applied their diagnostic tools to the fault. That moment, and what the car sounds like when it finally fires, remains the question the project has been building toward for the better part of a year. Whether the answer justifies everything that came before it is, perhaps, the most interesting question of all. So what does this story tell us? A man with 6 million subscribers, a full workshop team, and serious financial resources could not start a Ferrari without the manufacturer's explicit cooperation. That is not just a build story. It is a statement about who really owns a modern supercar. Ferrari came back eventually, but only on their terms. Only when the car was complete. Only when Armstrong played by their rules. And that 296 GTB, in full challenge-spec, has still never fired under its own power. When it does, subscribe. You will not want to miss it.